Hello and welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about the underlying connections and root causes which shape our lives. My name is Luke. Mike is across from me. Today we're going to talk about church scandals, defying the left, and ending the administrative state. Good luck. Okay. All right. Starting off with a question. Mike, this came from you. Is social media fundamentally feminine? What are your thoughts on that?
That came from me. That came from you.
Did it?
Yep. After our last podcast, we were talking about masculine traits and feminine traits.
Yeah.
And we were talking about a parallel. We were talking about how if boys get in a fight,
Yeah.
it's rather clean.
Well, or it's openly dirty.
Well, it can be,
Yeah.
bloody.
Right?
But from an emotional perspective, it's somewhat clear cut.
Sure.
When girls fight, it's not at all clear. It is.
Are they more likely to hold a grudge for a longer amount of time?
I don't know. They just, in guys' terminology, they fight dirty, right?
It's more often the case I've seen that when guys get into a physical altercation, they end up, if not as friends,
They can.
at least
yeah.
respecting each
That's
other.
right. That's the whole John Wayne, the quiet man.
It rarely ends up that way.
Yeah. So we were
with
talking about the masculine traits of arguing, the virtues and the vices. Then we were talking about the feminine traits, the virtues and the vices, the
Yeah.
interior life of women. But that leads towards the vices of manipulation and insinuation, and the way of warfare for women is different.
Well, and if women have a threat, physical violence isn't really on the table, although it happens.
Yeah.
Then it's social exclusion.
Have you ever seen a girl? Did you ever see a girl?
I was a middle
fight
school
in-
teacher for a long
Oh
time.
man! So I saw one in high school. It's got to be one of the ugliest, terrifying things I've ever witnessed.
Okay.
To see two girls swinging at each other, on a playground, so to speak, for high schoolers.
Yeah.
And it was distressing to see. But we were talking about that, and then we were also talking about movies.
Okay.
The Brie Larson stuff. Did you look up, by the way, and find out that it's Marvel yet?
No.
You haven't? Okay.
You think it is?
It is,
Did
yeah.
you double check?
No, I don't need to.
Oh, okay. All right.
I actually just read an article about this too, about Disney flopping they were talking about the Wish flop and the girl flops. And they said, but why did we like Sarah Connors? Or why do we like Princess Leia? Or why did a whole host of, kick butt girls, so to speak, from
Right.
prior days. And he kind of made similar points that you were making, that they weren't unfeminized.
Right.
They still did tough things because they had to, but there was maternal aspects of defense, Alien,
Yep.
right?
She's
Sigourney
defending
Weaver.
the little girl.
Yep. And so all these things, and so out of that, we just noticed, well, what about social media? The fights on social media are like girl fights. They're
They're threats of exclusion.
insinuation, exclusion, we're going to cancel you. And when you said it, I think that's a really valid point. It's a reflection of a femininity that is, we'll call it 51% in our culture. It's more, our culture is more feminine than it is masculine at this point right now.
Well, yeah, I would
seems.
argue that the move in our culture has shifted from the masculine honor culture to the empathy culture, which is a
Yeah.
feminine derived.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if that's the case, I think that's interesting then. What it also ends up meaning is that the social media companies are feminine, right?
Okay. They're definitely liberal and leftist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that this is the tools. So there are men at the top of these companies, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. I guess that's the same now, isn't it?
Yep.
But these companies are using these same ways to succeed instead of a prior age, let's say the Carnegie Hall or all these people who built railroads or steel or
Right.
there's this I want to build something. I want to make something. I want to produce something.
Conquest, ambition.
That's right.
Sure.
Sometimes with vice, but often for good, right? Maybe they do run over people as well, but it's that masculine drive to make something,
Right.
to conquer a foreign thing that's never been done. And the social media that's not. It is exploring interpersonal relationships and the degradation of them.
Well,
and we're
and it's
finding that it's on purpose.
If I look at the different social media companies or what it's like to be on different social media platforms, right? And I'm on Twitter and Instagram and Twitter, X. And X is by far the masculine platform. It's almost exclusively
Was
men.
it before?
I think so. Yeah. It's almost exclusively men. You know, it's not pictures of kids, which is what Facebook's really pictures of grandkids now, but it's not selfies, it's not kid pictures, although they're on there. And so what you see is the social exclusion threats aren't the same as you would see on another platform. Instead, it's more, I'm going to mock you incessantly until you give up, which is what men do, right? They're going to push each other and say, you know, don't act like that. You can't be one of us. They're going to test each other.
That's true.
Are you tough enough to be in our group?
That's true.
And X is definitely like that.
Did you see the developments on the X story and the advertisers we talked about last time?
Yeah, and I had some. There
Is
some
that on
bold
your list? Sorry,
developments.
I
Yeah.
don't have all your stuff, so I don't know if I.
Yeah, but actually, before we do that, I just want to say if you're enjoying this conversation, make sure to click subscribe so you can get our episodes sent directly to you automatically when we trying to do a couple times a week, although the holidays, we'll see how it goes. But we're at episode 40. Is that right? 41.
41.
We passed 40. Yeah. I feel like 50 is the real substantial number. It feels like you got to a year at 50 for some reason. And it also,
Well, we're coming up on a year.
yeah.
We started last December and we posted our first ones in January, so we're coming up on a year.
Well, let's jump into to Elon and his response about advertisers pulling out of X. Disney in particular. He was at some kind of a conference with a bunch of with an audience, right? Being interviewed on stage.
Yeah.
And basically flipping the bird to all the companies that have been pulling their.
Yeah, and he named, what's his name?
He named Bob Iger.
Bob Iger. That's
the
right.
Disney CEO. And what's interesting is he said, the interviewer asked him, and
Which
this
is
wasn't
clever.
the clip that went around.
Since DeSantis already has a war with him.
Yeah.
That was clever.
Well,
Like if he's going to name somebody.
I have a feeling he had just gotten off the phone with him, is what my sense of why he
Right.
was saying, Bob, if you're in here.
Yeah.
But what I noticed is that, well, there was a clip that got kind of cut out. So there was the clip that went around where he was like, go F yourself, right?
Yes,
So all the people who want, and if you want to destroy Twitter, do it and let history will judge you for what you've done, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm about freedom. And that last line he said about, he's so sick of people trying to look good while doing evil.
Yeah.
And
Which is a knock on Google, I think.
I think it's a knock on all of them.
Well, that's true. But remember, Google said, first, do no evil. That
Right.
was their original motto. Do
Don't
no
be
evil.
evil, right,
Don't
yeah.
be evil, yeah.
But so the thing that didn't make the clip, right? Because he wasn't, he did drop the F word in there too, was talking about, the interviewer said, do you think people will boycott Disney because of what you're saying? Right? In other words, people are going to take sides on this. Mm-hmm. It's freedom or not. Mm-hmm. And he bought Twitter saying this is a civilization protecting element. And if we get rid of it, we get rid of civilization because free speech is that important.
It has been that, especially in the world, internationally.
Yeah. And so Elon had a good comeback. He said they already are, about whether people will boycott Disney.
They already are boycotting.
We already
it's
are.
True.
We're not going to their stuff. We don't care what they
totally
have
true.
to say.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, and this dawned on me today, I was listening to somebody, and it rung true, is everything that we're seeing from Disney right now was in development in 2020. So all of that social, like we're going to change things, impetus in 2020 is now bearing fruit and showing that we're sick of it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. What I think when I saw that was it felt good to see it because I know that Elon Musk, we're temporary friends when I say we, the right, because he is left of center, the old center. Right. So we're temporary allies. And maybe that temporary is a long time, but it felt nice to have somebody to say, go ahead and take your shot, man.
It was a very masculine move.
Yeah, it is.
As for the owner of a social media company.
It was, in one sense, Trumpian, right? Because that's what Trump was. He gave voice to this pent-up frustration. And people could hear things they wish that if they said it, not that they could, but that if they did, it would have as much impact.
Yeah.
And most people just don't have that kind of impact. Mm-hmm. So to hear it expressed from someone is cathartic in a sense. It's like, yeah, that's what I wish if... That's what I think, but nobody cares what I think.
Yeah, that's right.
And they care what he thinks. Man, that's awesome. I'm glad you said that.
Have you heard the phrase of F you money? When you have
Yeah.
there's a certain amount of money you don't have to
Yeah,
carry
yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
Well, he's definitely got it.
That's
and
right.
And he's showing it.
Yeah, that's right.
How do you think it's going to go? How's it going to end up, you think?
I think that is a great question. I think that the immediate, okay, so I think what we always struggle with is looking at data sets, so to speak, and seeing a trend. And we think the trend that we see develop is probably going to go on forever. And it never does.
Right.
The immediate trend is it's not going to go well. But I don't think that's going to be the end. I think it's actually going to go well.
So you think advertisers will come back, or do you think the whole model is going to shift?
They might not come back, but he'll get different ones.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm thinking.
And I think that there is a slow turning taking place, and we don't know if it will be successful or not, but things are turning right now.
Yeah.
In comparison to even a year ago, I think.
Well, and the question too is, can those companies afford to not advertise on X?
That was part of his point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're going to have to pay for that too.
So I kind of tend to think that we're at a risk point. We're at a fork in the road, and it's worth probably what I think is more than ever before. It's worth saying something. It's worth risking. It's worth the risk.
You mean just people being outspoken?
To be outspoken, to be resentful, to be in disagreement. There has been no more momentum than there is now in the last 8 years.
Right.
And
it feels like the pressure now is on corporations to get back into the neutral zone, where they said we're not taking sides in the social.
I agree.
Social space.
Yeah, I just did the same thing. I signed up. The Hulu came out with $1.99 for a year, so I signed again because I'm not paying regular stuff. And any comments you want to add? Yeah, tell Disney who owns you. I like your thing, but tell Disney to be friendly again. We're near the end of our tether.
Yeah.
That was it.
Okay. You sent
Nobody
that was your
cares.
reply.
That was my reply.
Somebody in Indonesia is going to read that. Yeah.
But you figure how many things like that, who knows?
That's right.
Who knows
Yeah.
what
A drop
happened.
in the bucket, but a drop nonetheless.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. You had a question. Can we live without the administrative state?
Yes. So here's my question.
Why would we want to do that?
Okay, well, so you're setting up the context. The administrative state is unelected. Did you see the lawsuit taking place right now that the Supreme Court decided to hear about the administrative state? I don't remember which branch it was in New York.
Is this the same as the deep state? Are we talking about the same thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's not necessarily the same thing, but one turns into the other. I think the administrative state turns into the deep state. Because they're unelected, they can exert, they weren't overtly the deep state until 2016, in my opinion.
They didn't flex their muscle.
No, they didn't flex. That's right.
Or maybe they've been flexing all along and everybody was just going along with it.
If so, at least they were restrained by that factor. Yes, I tend to think
they were happily
you're right.
in the shadows.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
But so I think it becomes a deep state, but I think the administrative state is the people that are assigned to function. So the executive branch assigns a ton of people to take care of what it's supposed to do. The legislative branches do the same thing, and so does the judicial branch. So right now there's a case before the Supreme Court in which I don't remember which organization now, but they had their own administrative court, and they have a hearing, and they fine companies, and they find them guilty. And this man filed a lawsuit against them and says, I have a right to be tried in court of law. You're not a court of law. You're an administrative court of a bureaucratic entity. And this is the common way they do it, and they're doing it more and more. And what they say is their defense is this relieves the pressure on the courts for all the legal stuff, right?
Right.
But part of his lawsuit was, well, in the last 250, you have found for your organization every single time.
It seems like a slam dunk as far as Supreme Court goes because the separation of powers is fundamental to the Constitution.
I agree, and yet I disagree. It should be a slam dunk, but they have not necessarily. Well, Obamacare should have been a slam dunk.
Yeah, but it's a lot different court now than it was when Obamacare
I agree
went
it
through.
is. You're right. So maybe it will be,
Right.
but I'm going to wait and see because
You always have to. With
you
them.
have to, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but hopefully, but the interesting thing about it is the articles I read were from the left, and they're freaking out about it because if this were undone, there's a lot of power that's exercised. Anyway, all this to answer the administrative state is what is assigned power, not elected, and they transcend elected officials. And now they wield a tremendous amount of power. And they've turned into the deep state.
Well, and this was something that came up, I remember under Obama, people were talking about how little was given, or how little power was actually explicitly written into laws under Obama, specifically
Yeah,
Obamacare.
that's right.
It just said that they will make regulations around this area,
with-
and you're just giving regulatory power, this massive amount of power, instead of legislative
that was
power.
DACA as well.
And that's happening. I mean, that happens in education all the time, where
Yes.
there's, they teach us, there's OARs, Oregon Administrative Rules, and there's
Yes.
ORSs, or
Yes.
Oregon Revised Statute.
And they are not legal laws, but they have the semblance of the same weight.
And they can still threaten your license. They can still go after
so
your
the one I
income.
wish I had not prepped this. I read it and now I don't remember, but they fined him $600,000, whatever this thing was, and they make fines and they get paid. Right? It's a functional.
It goes right back into their budget.
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. So anyway,
Okay.
the administrative state. So the question though is, and this is an evil thing, I think.
Yeah.
And the thing where it also the rubber hits the road is this is what stopped Trump. It wasn't just deep state. Deep state, I would say, is the malicious component.
Okay.
But administrative state, I think, is the bureaucratic component. There's some studies like 96% of administrative state is Democrat. Their jobs depend upon the machinery of government working.
Yeah.
And Republicans tend to say, I mean, this is Ronald Reagan, limited government. We want to get government out of your life so you can live it. The
Right.
Democrats know we want more government because we want to run things because you can't,
Yeah.
right? And so this whole contest, Trump got defeated by deep state actors supported by administrative lean.
Yeah.
And so DeSantis has said, Ramaswamy has said, these people have said, we're going to stop the administrative state. I don't know how, if you can. I don't know how you can, but
It's interesting. It reminds me of a pamphlet I saw floating around. I don't know if it's real or not, but claiming to be from the CIA, training how you, as operatives, you can infiltrate institutions and organizations and keep them moving in the direction you want. And one of the things they said is when people start pushing for reforms and changes, you bog it down in committees and
Yes.
in rules and obligations
This is the
until
administrative
the
state.
momentum fades and fizzles, and
Yep.
now you just reinstitute
You
things as they
survive.
always were,
Yep,
right?
that's right.
And I thought, man, and that came out at the same time as there's been these reforms for the Southern Baptist Convention. And we saw the committee who runs the convention when they get together every, I think,
Yeah,
2
yeah.
years. Literally, when somebody came up and said, we need to stop this specific thing, and I think it was critical race theory infiltrating
yeah,
church
yeah.
governance
They
and all
bog
this
it
stuff.
down.
They said, wow, we need to have
Yeah,
a committee.
yeah, yeah,
and the
yeah.
committee will look
Exactly.
into this, and then we'll talk
Exactly.
about it in 2 years. And it's just like, oh, I
this
see.
is administrative
This is
state.
how you stop it when
That's
the
right.
leadership doesn't
That's
want
right.
it.
So the question is this. The administrative state impedes upon our ability to self-govern.
Right.
The founders built the Constitution with this idea. People should be able to govern their own lives with a minimum amount of interaction from an authority above them.
Interference.
Interference. There have to be some taxes. You have to have a militia. You have to be able to defend yourself. There's a few things that need to take place.
Right.
And that was it. Everything else, but now we're way beyond that. But here's the great question. Can we self-govern ourselves today when we're on the internet here? You and I can't make this for ourselves.
We can't make the internet?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but how much of the internet is influenced by the administrative state?
It's all run by it.
How so?
It's
Like
in...
Comcast,
Okay, wait.
Verizon.
That's true. But, okay, so maybe that's a bad example. Maybe I should just backpedal to technology in general.
Okay.
As an illustration of infrastructure. We can't build the infrastructure. In the original days, to be self-governing, you could go and manage your life. You could take care of everything that's needed. You can grow food. All that is needed, you can do.
Right.
You can manage. We don't live in that culture anymore. We can't do that. We have roads that are not just dirt, muddy pathways, because those don't take anything. We have electricity. We have plumbing. I mean, we live in a place where they are facing a plumbing issue because of pipes put in and copper things breaking, and that's citywide, right?
Yeah. Right.
They might hire private people to do it, but it's a city thing. Somebody has,
It's the city's
as individuals,
infrastructure.
it's none of our responsibilities alone.
But it's so minimal. So here's what I think of as the
It's not, I
administrative
don't
state.
think it's minimal. I think it's huge.
I would guess, and I'd be interested if somebody online was to correct us, but I would guess it's 10% of the big budgets are
Administrative?
infrastructure, handling infrastructure and keeping the trains running on time. I
Well,
would guess the
okay.
vast majority of the expense is education and state budgets,
Okay,
defense in federal budgets.
that's
and then,
fine.
But the whole rest of it is social.
I agree with you. So we'll call it bloat or administrative creep, right?
Right. Well, it's everybody saying there should be a law whenever they see
For
something
this,
wrong.
that, da, 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 da,
And as
da.
soon as you pass the law, you
Yeah,
have to have
that's right.
someone enforcing the law.
So-
and then you have to have supervisors
So the
running all
right
those people.
says, let's cut all that out. We don't need that, da, da, da. And I
Yeah.
agree with those arguments.
Deregulate industry.
The shutting down the Department of Education, Jimmy Carter started it. We did just fine before that. And the truth is our test scores have been worse ever since.
Right.
So shutting it down, I think would be great. But when you take that argument, it doesn't work. It runs up into we function in a way that it can no longer do that.
Wait,
And so
tell me what you mean. We function in a way that we can no longer do that.
Well,
if
we
you
have-
got rid of the Department of Ed tomorrow,
yeah. Oh, we can get rid of the Department of Ed. I'm not saying that.
okay.
We can't do that. But we can't get rid of administrative state in total in everything.
Yeah,
Because
but-
we have infrastructure needs now. Our way of living is built upon things that are outside of our individual control, just the way the world works. And if that's the case, the question is, can we self-govern?
Well, let me give you an example of what, because I think, yeah, we could totally self-govern. I think if you return power to the local municipalities and let them hand it to the states as needed, and let the states hand it to the federal as needed, rather than it go in the other direction. But an example is air traffic controllers. Okay, there's a massive shortage in everything right now. But one of the things Obama did, and this was declared by his administration, is that there's way too many white men as air traffic controllers. We got to fix that. That's his priority. Well, now what you see is the number of people getting the job of an air traffic controller who are not qualified has gone up. And we know this because the number of near collisions around major airports in the United States has something like tripled
Yeah.
in the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
And so it's people who are, because the only way you change the demographic of a job description is by lowering the bar of entry. Assuming, as I do, that there is no blatant person saying, "Oh, that guy sounds like a black guy. We're going to not let him in," right? If there's a test score requirement, if there's a skill level that you need to have in order to do this job, and it just so happens that white and Asian people end up passing those tests, then the only way to get around it is to lower the requirement for the tests.
And
you see
nobody
that
wants-
happening in schools. You see it
Yeah.
happening everywhere. And so then infrastructure isn't maintained, right? So I would argue we can't afford to maintain the administrative state. I think it's going to crumble under its own weight,
Especially when you have that kind of engineering taking place.
which is now the sole
I agree.
mission
Yeah.
of the administrative state is social
Yeah.
engineering.
Yeah. That's a whole nother aspect, I think. I think the dilemma there is that it has become politically taboo to talk about what are the potential reasons for that. Nobody wants to talk about the breakdown of families, that Asian kids have family support that black kids in an inner city don't have.
Yeah.
And so they do homework more. They're forced to by their parents.
Yeah.
And so they take more math classes and STEM classes, and they end up having the capacities for that job, whereas another cultural priorities don't lend towards that. And nobody wants to say that because they say, well, that's racist. Well, it's not racist. It's the breakdown of the family is the root of these things, I think, more than
It has nothing to
other.
do with race.
No, I don't think it has anything to do with race.
It just so happens
But that doesn't mean that it doesn't show up in races.
No, it just so happens that we group ourselves in communities based on race voluntarily. And when that happens, then a culture shift might impact one community over another
Yeah.
based on location and social connection.
Yeah.
The trick is it's really hard to pull it apart. And you can claim to, but
So you think that we can self-govern with the amount of infrastructure that we rely upon? That's another way of getting.
I mean,
at the
I'm trying to
question.
go through. I want police officers, right? I want firemen to show up, though. Although I would argue there's probably too many of those, just because of the amount they actually work and how much they actually do.
Okay, what if we took it out of the category
But beyond that,
of
what
government
does the local government
included
should do?
corporate, large corporations?
Well,
Because
why
your
would we?
argument earlier was internet. Well, that's not government, and you're right. That's corporations, but they're as governmental. Government is as corporate, and corporations are as governmental. For us, self-governing, what's the difference?
So a huge amount of the administrative state is managing the budgets for the money that the governments hand out. So even the internet might be controlled or highly regulated, but it also is going to be funding things. So somebody at the state house says, well, we need to get more solar panels, so we're going to give grants to all these companies to put in solar panels. And then you see solar panel ads everywhere, right? So now you've got all these administrators chasing down the dollars and making sure you spent them the right way. And those administrators are highly paid. You do the same thing with, there was an example of the homelessness program here in Oregon, in Portland and Salem and Eugene, but also San Francisco has an even bigger one. Well, so little, I mean, it's tens of millions of dollars a year going into it, more than that.
Yeah.
All of it is going to pay for these administrators
Yeah.
to manage the budgets
Yeah.
and to hand them out.
Yeah.
But these administrators are making six figures and
Yeah.
beyond, $250,000, some of them in San Francisco.
Yeah.
To do what?
It's the same in education.
And so then they hand the money to these nonprofit organizations who have 5 administrators for every one
Yeah.
person in the street.
Yeah.
So you got 6 layers going through, maybe
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
All these people paid more than the actual person on the street trying to help the homeless,
Yeah.
which is why all that money needs to get taken out of taxes and put into churches to do the actual work. I think hands down. And when the churches abandoned it or thought that they could give it to the government to do is when it started to falter.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so what do you think about my thing about corporations versus government? So if you blend the
corporations and governments blended is fascism. I mean, that's
Yeah.
what we're seeing.
two. Yeah.
I think though that if you can the government stops handing out checks for every little pet project that a local official wants to see funded, then you see a real free market and people get what they actually want to pay for. And then you can cut all of that administrative state out. In the beginning, it would hurt the big companies who have structured themselves around getting these funds. But in the end, it would be stronger. I'm convinced. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. All right, let's go back. I had a connection I wanted to make, thinking about Elon Musk. And at the same time this week, I was reading Elon Musk. I was seeing Elon Musk videos going all around and people losing their minds. On the other side, on Christian Twitter, are pastors having this argument based on an article that Kevin DeYoung put out. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yeah.
Okay, so he put out an article criticizing Doug Wilson and the church in Moscow, Idaho, saying his tone is too abrasive, it's too flippant. He's using words that he shouldn't, like wuss, and calling people names, and that it's attracting these young Christian men who really just want to be flippant and disregard decorum rather than loving their neighbor and doing the right thing. And it sort of unleashed this big argument. And then as I'm watching this argument, I see Elon taking it to 11 in the same sort of regard of like, screw all you and your standards. And it made me think this is that same, because my impression of the Kevin DeYoung article is it's very much we have to hold the rules of society in the midst of the society's crumble. And Wilson's actually fighting. I don't know. The best example or response I heard of it was an actual clip out of the Moscow, their school, the new St. Andrew's College. And they had this promotional video, and it was literally like Sanballat telling Nehemiah to stop rebuilding the city and the temple, because what is this foolish guy doing? He knows he can't do it. And then portraying themselves as saying, we're trying to rebuild a Christian society out here in Idaho as the world is crumbling around them. And while some of us defend the gates and the walls holding swords, and others have taken up the trowel and we're going to rebuild. And so you have these other guys in mega churches with lots of rules and pleated khaki pants who are saying, well, you're not following our rules, you shouldn't be doing that. But they're not in the fight. Or if they are, it's like with white gloves on.
Decorum.
Yeah, and it really reminded me of the difference between Elon saying, we're not going to follow your feminine rules.
Yeah. Now you find yourself drawn towards the Wilson side versus the Young,
Yeah.
which little side rabbit trail I find curious because you're not drawn towards the Trump side. But
Well,
it's the same spirit, or similar, I'll say, a similar spirit, right?
What I appreciate about Trump, that he sticks it to them too, right? He'll put
I mean, he's crass, he's a rule breaker, a
Yeah.
form shatterer,
yeah, I appreciate that about Trump.
and
for sure.
at times with an element of vanity. Sometimes it doesn't seem to have a good reason.
And I wouldn't characterize Wilson that way. I think what Trump gets wrong is that his ego is his main
Yeah.
inspiration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I think what's interesting then is here's what's funny is I probably enjoy and support Trump more than you do. Mm-hmm. However,
But you like Doug Wilson less.
I do.
So is this the separation between what you look at a pastor versus the way you look at a politician? Okay, we're back. We had a little technical difficulty, and we had to jump out and jump back in. But we were talking about the difference between liking Trump and appreciating his crass demeanor versus when we see it from a church leader. And why are
that's true.
Why are there different standards for a politician from a pastor?
Yeah.
And a lot of people have brought that up as a criticism to Christians of like, wait a minute,
have.
you're okay with Trump's philandering and
Totally have.
and my brother brought this up because one of the criticisms I think he said my parents brought up about Obama was his questionable Christianity and that they couldn't vote for him because he wasn't a strong Christian. Well, then they immediately voted for Trump in the next election.
Right.
So how do we square that? What's the standard? What do you think?
Oh man, now you're taking the question. We're not doing the original question. Now we're
going farther.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I just have how I act and think, and I don't know if I know why. But it doesn't bother me when Trump was a bull in a china shop. I remember.
But you don't want a pastor that's that way.
No.
And or you don't even think pastors should be that way.
No, I don't think they should be. And what I was saying when we went off air was we have to deal with Jesus saying two things.
Okay.
One, your whitewashed cups, right? Your sepulchers of the dead, that's abrasive.
Yeah.
That's Trumpish, right?
Okay.
He also says, I am gentle and lowly of heart. Come to me. I will give you rest. I am meek. My yoke is easy. Come and learn from me.
The key thing, I think, with that part of Jesus' ministry is the smoldering wick he will not extinguish.
That would be another one, yeah.
Which to me speaks of someone whose faith is near its end. He's not going to stomp you out. Versus someone who, in defiance, declares their resistance to God's commands. That's a person he's going to resist openly with declaration of snakes and tombs and
Yeah. Well, so the dilemma is when you have a temperament type that's oriented towards the tombs calling and whatnot, Wilson calling and all that.
Doug Wilson.
Yeah. Sometimes you can't restrain it in the areas where it should be restrained. You apply that vehicle equally to all, and maybe not equally, but far too much. I just know
Trump
that
definitely does that, right?
he does. Trump
Somebody
has
on his side, someone on their side. He's going to praise them if they praise him.
That's right.
He's going to attack them if they attack him.
That's right.
Yeah.
But see, and then it doesn't bother me so much because on a political level, I don't hold him to the same things as I would to a pastor. He's not called to be holy as a politician. It's not that he's called to be unholy as an individual, but the calling is not one in which you live out the gospel in order to. Paul says, I persuade, I'm not one thing that I do and then another thing that I say. It's the same thing. I don't try to persuade you with words.
Okay.
I don't try to pull one over on you. I'm not trying to convince. I don't want to bully you. He has all these things that he's restrained according to how the world would say to be persuasive. And he goes, I'm not going to function that way. I'm going to proclaim Jesus and him crucified. And I'm going to trust that might either offend you and you'll be an aroma of death to death on a later thing he says, or you might find something intriguing in its aroma to life.
So on some sense, when I read Paul talk about that, I hear him rejecting the sort of political gamesmanship, but also the sort of marketing strategies.
Yeah.
I see a lot of churches, and especially the big ones, fall into doing those very things.
I agree.
And so, but what they're doing is they're using people's sense of an expectation of decorum. When I go to church, it should be like this, right? If they saw, I was I was watching British television, and there was a main character was a pastor, Anglican, whatever, and he's outside smoking right after church is over, and I think, man, if a pastor in America of any church I can think of was seen outside smoking, it would be like the end.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah.
If he's out drinking, Christians love to be addicted to coffee. They just can't be addicted to smoking.
Yeah. Well, what you have to, I think the verse is also be kind, tenderhearted, gentle, let no proceed out of your mouth
unwholesome
vile
talk,
or unwholesome talk.
Yeah.
Well, that gets difficulty. I was in a church setting once where the people in that church setting, the leaders, they prided themselves on their, I won't call it casual swearing. It was a little more refined than that, but their abundance of strategic swearing, we'll call it.
Sure.
And it's not that I disagreed with their approach, but it was so frequent and so often. I'd sit in an elder meeting and all these guys are swearing in the meetings as a regular course of way to live. And I just thought that cannot mean, I don't think this is right. It has to mean something, let nothing vile come out of your mouth.
But that's not what we're describing Doug Wilson to do.
Well, but what we're talking about is a tension between gentle behavior and appropriate caustic behavior.
Okay.
Or call it earthy even. I often talk about Luther as he was earthy. I don't think a lot of people would have liked him if he would be in our setting today. The things he said and the way he talked.
Earthly.
Earthy. I'm not earthly.
Earthly comes right before demonic in its descriptions in the Bible.
That's true.
But what you mean is more rugged.
Yes.
Less refined.
Yes, less refined, willing to trample a little bit of a bull in a china shop, because there's the straight shooter. I think the refined type ends up being sitting at a parade and the emperor walks by in no clothes and he won't say anything. It takes the little girl.
Which is what a lot of Christians are trained to do right now.
I agree with you. So I think that's a distortion, but just because it's a distortion doesn't mean there's not something there that's right. Mm-hmm. So I can't go to the other side and applaud the ones that are crass and don't seem to have a restraint on that. And I shouldn't say
and
crass.
And that was your impression of Doug Wilson?
No, not with the word crass. Doug Wilson... Unrestrained in a critical spirit, with a critical spirit.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something... I was battling it, and it's not something I needed to be, and I had to stop. I read Credenda Agenda, I guess it would be. It's probably not even done anymore. This is when they mailed out magazines. Mm-hmm. But it was, but the truth is, it's in the whole dominion theology movement. The whole post-millennial movement tends to be arrogant. The people are arrogant.
So is this like the young, restless, reformed guys, kind of that same spirit of we're going to bounce around and push buttons until...
I suppose there's a similarity.
Yeah.
Sproul, James Boyce, when they were young men, they were called the Young Turks.
That's a shocking thing to call somebody.
Interesting. Yeah, it is. And it wasn't a stereotype or a racial thing. This has been in the late 70s.
But you know what the Young Turks reference is.
Yeah, the Turkish armies that came and swarmed over Jerusalem and
took
over
Armenian
Eastern
genocide in particular, where they called themselves the Young Turks.
They were trying to take over the whole of Western civilization.
Okay.
And they succeeded in large part. They got all the way, this is the Moors in Spain. They nearly took over Europe, but then they were pushed back. And they stayed in Constantinople, and the Ottoman Empire ruled for like 800 years.
So they're saying these guys are trying to take over Christendom with their Reformed theology.
Yeah. And they were
they've had
ruthless and not ruthless, is not.
But very critical of anyone opposing them.
I
see James White kind of like that. Have you ever followed James White?
I do. I would put him in that category also.
But I don't put Doug Wilson in that, and maybe I followed him more recently.
I think he's changed. He's gotten older, but yeah.
What I see with him...
Did you know Piper called him out in public once?
No, but...
Yeah, at a conference.
I think Piper likes his white gloves too, to be honest. He fell for a lot of the 2020 stuff, unfortunately. But he's an older man. He needs to retire. The part of the problem is it's a fight we're in, and people are walking around the battlefield criticizing their own army.
I know.
For not having their buttons buttoned.
I know.
On their uniform. It's like, look, we're dying out here.
This was part of the Lee and Grant the photos of Lee and Grant when Lee comes to surrender. Lee is impeccably dressed. Everything is
right.
in order. And Grant's muddy all the way up his pants.
Well, that's very Southern too. The decorum.
Well, I know, but that's that clash of the Northern sensibility of let's get to work. I don't care about the mud. Let's just do this thing.
Yeah.
In the South, they fought hard, but they're also keeping decorum.
So here's what I posted. Speaking of Grant, this is what I posted regarding Trump and why I favored him. And I think of him the same way with
2020 favored him.
Yeah, right. It says this, in February 1862, U.S. Grant took Fort Henry and attacked Fort Donelson. When the Confederate commander asked him for terms, Grant replied, "No terms except an unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted." The Confederates surrendered, and President Lincoln promoted Grant to Major General, volunteers. Grant fought skillfully to win Vicksburg, the key city on the Mississippi, and broke the Confederate hold on Chattanooga. He was appointed general-in-chief in March 1864. President Lincoln fended off demands for his removal by saying, "I can't spare this man. He fights."
Yep.
In a letter to his wife, Julia, Grant swore that at Shiloh he was sober as a deacon no matter what they said to the contrary. And then there's another saying of Lincoln about his drinking, Grant's drinking. And he said, "If I knew what whiskey he preferred, I'd send it to all the other generals."
Yeah. He wanted somebody who would win the war. He had general failure after general failure.
And his failures, the failure of the generals, like the failure, I think, of many Christian leaders in our culture, is a refusal to engage the enemy. Instead, they'll look to and fro and say, "We're not ready, we're not ready."
Okay, so this is going to get back to the thing, we're going to keep popping up one of our disagreements. I agree with you on that completely.
Yeah.
And when it comes to civil war, and I'll call that secular or political, whatever you want to call it, except this, that's not how the church is called to wage war. I don't see the same thing. I see it different.
Well, what I appreciate about Doug
Wilson,
Wilson,
not how Jesus won his war.
I'm not sure
He
I
won
follow
it
what
by
you're saying.
being killed.
On the physical realm,
Yeah.
but he incited his own murder
not just
by
the physical,
refusing to shut up
spiritually as
when
well.
people were
take
out to hunt
sins.
him.
I agree. So
Here's an example that I was thinking of. When, no, that example slipped away.
I just think that as I talk, you'll remember it.
Yeah.
The Christian warfare is patterned after the physical warfare by name and metaphor, but the way it's fought is different. Is in fact inverse, completely inverse.
But only on the physical realm. He's saying our fight is not against flesh and blood. That doesn't mean we don't fight or that we don't fight the way they did. It means we don't fight physically, but we fight ideas. We fight, which
I agree
are
with
called
that.
strongholds.
I agree with
right?
that.
So if it's a totally different way of thinking, then how can it be called a fight? Mm-hmm. Do you see what I'm saying? Like if all this warfare metaphor is not meant for you to study warfare and understand it, then what is the use of it?
Yeah. Well, so here's an illustration where you and I agree, and then we're going to probably part at some place. I don't know where. We agree that Elijah calling the prophets of Baal names is a legitimate thing, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we differ in that you think that should be done more frequently, and I think it's only occasional. Is that where we differ?
I think in our day and age, it needs to be done frequently. Here's what I was going to say.
See, I would say it's still infrequent.
I think the difference between Doug Wilson and what I would say is the really serious Christian response of like the 90s to this rock music, and we got to get rid of it. The only difference between the two is Doug Wilson laughs. And Christians couldn't laugh to save their lives in the 90s and the 80s. Everything was a crisis. Everything was a catastrophe. Everything was a moral outrage. And nobody wants to join something like that unless you're equally morally afraid that your children are going to be stolen in the night. We should be more afraid that our children will be morally stolen, right? Just by the fact that our government itself is trying to participate in that theft. And yet we can laugh at the enemy and their foolish nature, and that God sits in this throne and laughs at their attempts to conquer because he has a plan and he'll stand sovereignly and rule in the end. So that's what I enjoy, is listening to these guys not fall into a moral panic, not retreat into oblivion, but to say, no, we're going to do this. We've got a better religion. We've got the answer to what's ailing this world. Let's bring it to them and make it appealing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so this is related to this. And actually, before I get into the next thing, talking about church again, we seem to talk about church a lot. I wanted to mention this is a part of the Trinity School. This podcast is a culture building enterprise. The Trinity School includes education, influence, industry, and the arts. And if you want to support what's going on at the Trinity School in building communities that honor Christ, you can donate to our efforts by going to gracedayton.com/Trinity School. I've actually been helping a small school on the other side of Willamette Valley. They're trying to get started too, and looking at how they can do the same thing where they get 20 kids together and hire a tutor. And so I've been going over and helping them figure out how to organize it, and then training their volunteers and their tutor to manage behavior, because normal adults aren't good at managing groups of kids. There's some tricks to it, but I'm excited about it. Okay, so here's my thought. Talking about church leadership in crisis. Mike Bickle,
Okay.
Kansas City International House of Prayer.
Yeah.
8 or 9 women accusing him, if not of just outright adultery, then abuse of some sexual nature. His response has been really mysterious. He said, I refuse to defend myself, which I think is a Christian response, right? He's going to turn the other cheek is kind of the idea. But he also will not declare his innocence or his guilt. So it leaves this giant question in everybody's mind of like, well,
Did he say that, or he just hasn't done it?
He just hasn't done it. He hasn't said anything except I won't defend myself. And if he has, it hasn't been made public.
And so what you would have preferred is, I won't defend myself, but I will say one time I didn't do this, or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Even Jesus, right? He's not going to declare himself
Yeah.
sovereign, but he would say, who can accuse me of any sin?
Yeah.
He's going to declare his innocence if that's because it's the truth.
Yeah.
So there's an executive leadership team at the church who's sort of taken on this responsibility of overseeing an investigation into these accusations, asked him to step down, which he has. But now time's dragging on. And people who I've been kind of checking in on, who at first were saying they were hopeful that this would be resolved, that he would either be found guilty and we could move on, or not guilty and we could rejoice, whatever. But now there's this grumbling of like, why is it taking so long? Who are they? It's starting to look like a cover-up from the perspective of some.
Yeah.
The accusers are making further accusations against, there was a statement by that executive leadership team that said some significant number of the 8 or 9 women have been found to either say, we didn't want to be included in this, or it's not true. Then the people representing the victims are saying that hasn't happened. So there's no clarity on what's actually going on.
Yeah.
There were, I know, at least 2 women I heard in the days following this, when it broke out, who came out publicly, who were like a woman who's a worship leader at another church now. She says, my name shouldn't be in this. I don't know what you're talking about. So there's at least some of it that way.
Yeah.
But even the accusation of like, should the leadership team be referring to these women as accusers
Yeah.
or victims? Because an accuser is literally accurate, and yet it also is biblically loaded term of what you'd call Satan.
Yeah.
And then victim implies that he's guilty. They were victimized.
Yeah.
How would a church, if you and I have both been in circumstances where if something like this happened, we would have had to handle it. Currently, I feel like if something like this went down at our church, I'd be totally unprepared. Like I've been able to make public statements, obviously, in different circumstances, but give me a list of 1, 2, 3s. Have you ever looked into how to do this, or been trained, or have you had to handle any big controversies in church leadership?
Yeah, there's been some controversies, and no training, but my concern is I don't trust the training, because I think, for example,
does it turn into public relations management?
It does.
Really
That's
fast.
exactly what it is. And then what ends up happening is the values of this world are what drive those things.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with them. So I appreciate the not commenting or defending yourself thing.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean he's not guilty, or it doesn't mean he's innocent. But I think it's a biblical pathway. Jesus is willing to be insulted, and he allows himself to be, in a sense, abused. And that is a part of the other cheek thing. But I don't think it's the only thing that can happen. I think you have to make a statement. A situation where I was accused of something, and we put out a statement right away. and then we haven't put out more. But I think you have to say an initial.
Does there come a time when you have a meeting of the whole congregation, like even a closed door, if people who volunteer can come, or something along those lines? Those
Okay.
are the people I would care about in that circumstance versus the public.
This is what I think. Yes, but it's unpopular and it's murder to do.
Because they come with all kinds of crazy ideas.
It only makes it worse. But if you don't, you send a message you don't intend to send at all. And that is, we're the ones that handle this, the leadership, the
Stay
church.
out of it.
You're not kings, you're not priests.
Right. Yeah.
You don't have a capacity. Here's what the church is supposed to do. Imagine, and I bet you've never seen this done. Maybe you have. I've never seen it done. A lawsuit happens between brothers in the church.
Right.
Find somebody in the church who can hear it and make a discernment. Don't go to the courts.
And make it binding. Yeah.
You're both going to offer to bind it.
Right.
Isn't there somebody spiritually minded who can hear it and weigh in and what he thinks will hold?
Okay, so let me ask you this. Does that mean you create a separate judiciary in the church for Christians?
No, I wouldn't take it that far.
Okay.
But I do think that the expectation is the normal way to resolve things is in-house.
Right.
But my point was that it's in-house, not with the leadership. He doesn't actually say, go find a leader,
right,
or your pastor,
your
or the elders, or a deacon. A brother in the church.
A nominal Christian would be better.
Just one who's on the committed Lord's side, and he's your brother. That's it.
Yeah.
Doesn't he have enough sense? Now, here's the problem with it. Well, he may make a bad decision, and Paul has an answer. Better to be wronged. Who cares?
Right.
Who
What are you going to lose
cares?
money?
Yeah. So I have been in a couple of things like that, and the choice I think is what I've advocated for, and I've been where I wasn't in the number one position, and it was not pursued, but you gotta make it public, because if you don't, what you end up saying is that what people hear is that the problems when they're ugly problems,
we keep them
you
hidden.
gotta keep them hidden.
Okay, so in this circumstance,
be
when you're
ashamed.
saying make it public, there was a chance that most people had never even heard about the accusation.
Yeah.
Because the accusation was not made public.
Yeah.
Right.
So I was in a situation once, and a staff member was accused of being inappropriate to a minor girl.
Ooh.
And the police got involved, and we at the church got involved, and the advocacy was that we don't hide this from the people.
Right.
We say this is what's going on. We complied with the police process.
Yeah.
And we talked with the person. It was messy and ugly. Camera crews are there because the press gets a hold of it. Not fun.
Yeah.
But better to be not fun, and your message to your church is, sin is messy, man. We're going to try to figure out as best we can together. We're going to try to do it in the gospel, which has a couple of meanings. One, we can be honest with how bad it is, if it's really bad.
Yeah.
And we actually have room for think of this in the early church. A man sleeps with his father's wife.
Yeah.
And the Corinthian church thinks, we're going to be so full of grace, we're going to let this slide. Paul gets so mad at him.
Yeah.
And so they change course, and the guy repents. Paul says, receive him back.
Right.
That whole process would not be followed today. We would follow a marketing plan.
You'd send him to somebody else's church.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'd follow a marketing plan.
Yeah.
But so the story you're telling is not one where they kept it from the church. Because if it was in the news, how could you?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
it's when it's a quiet accusation.
The leadership didn't choose to. I'll have another one that involved me directly. It came out after a person in a church that I was involved with had abused his daughters.
Mm.
And more than one daughter said, yes, this happened, right? So but he had passed away. He had died. It was after he died. Well, so I'm talking with the family over a course of a few years, and I'd moved at that point. Anyway, here's what happened. The mom wanted to know what I would have done had I found out before he died.
Mm.
And what she wanted me to do was to gather brothers in the church and support him and help him return and be recovered,
Yeah.
which is fine. But I said
After they
something
was
different.
released from custody.
That's right.
Yeah,
I
you
said
definitely
I would
would
have
do
to
that.
call the police first. And here's why. The church is horrible at handling sexual matters. They're horrible. And here's why.
Wait, but that's not why.
No, that is why.
You have the police do it
Well,
because that's the police's job.
I know. There's that too.
It's not.
But there's
I-
another
like,
reason.
There's no circumstance where the church should be handling it by himself, is there? I mean,
Well, philosophically, what the argument is we're a new kingdom, we're a new society,
Okay.
and we can if they can oversee a lawsuit and you don't have to go to the magistrate,
right.
why can't we oversee a guy who's accused and he confesses that he was doing this with his daughter? Why can't we keep it in house and handle it from there? This is the issue that happened.
If you're allowed to
Salem.
castrate him, then the church can handle it.
If you're allowed to castrate him,
That's the problem I would see.
It is the problem.
Right, is that the government's role is to punish.
That's
the
exactly
evildoer.
right. The church doesn't carry the sword.
Right.
That is the problem. And so what ends up happening is, especially in these matters of sexual abuse, is the man is repentant. The church has no way to follow up with any teeth on that.
Right.
He can do it again and he just repents again. He can do it again and therefore the church ends up getting blackmailed because they have no sword. And
Yeah.
in this case, they're not supposed to have a sword. That's not the point. The point is you give them to the state so the state wields its sword and you stick by them with the gospel.
Right.
Well, no matter what happens. And if they go to prison, they go to prison. You know, she got really angry with me though.
Right.
This woman that I've known for a long time, good friends with, because she thought it was not compassionate, not kind, you know.
Right.
And I said, but there's a limitation. That's why this. I think it's why the sword isn't with the church.
See, part of what she's, I don't know her,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
But part of what I imagine is she's trying to figure out, you know, I should have known as
I
the
know,
wife
that
and
is
as the
part
mom.
of it. That is part of it.
And maybe she did know more than she let on. And now she's trying to come to grips with it and hoping you'll give her some
difficult.
some help.
Yeah. It's difficult.
I heard a great story. There's a guy named Victor Marks, and he's well known currently for rescuing kids all around the world that are stuck in trafficking and etc. He tells the story of after getting out of the Marines and really highly trained in martial arts since he was a kid. He became a youth pastor. He got saved in the Marines. He was passionate for Jesus. And he was given a couple to help counsel as a young youth pastor, like you should start counseling people and learn how to do this. And the dad is accelerating in his dysfunction, using drugs, cheating on his wife. At first it was like, oh, he cheated on her once. He's really sorry. Hopefully we can work this out. And then it becomes this serial thing. And now he's on drugs. And he's sliding down into destruction. So the wife calls one day and says, he just left. He's drunk or high or both. He slammed our 3-year-old against the wall. And this guy is just steaming, right? Well, hangs up the phone. He says to her, call the police. He hangs up the phone. In walks the guy, tears, hoping for more counseling and sympathy. And I just messed up, man. I'm so sorry. And yeah, I did it again. Blah, blah, blah. And he says, yeah, I heard you threw your daughter against the wall. And he sort of like sobers up for a second. How'd you hear about that? I just talked to your wife. And he's like, yeah, I don't know what's wrong with me. And he's crying. He says, maybe someone just needs to punch me, And the guy stands up and says, that's a great idea. And he walks over, grabs him, and just starts punching him in the face. And now the guy's screaming bloody murder, help, help. And the pastor comes in, stop. And this youth pastor's on top of him now. And he looks at the pastor. He says, no, it's fine. He told me he needed it. And he just keeps going. And so now the pastor has to stop him. And he wasn't a youth pastor
funny.
very much longer, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
that idea
Yeah.
has such appeal to me of like there's such a brokenness to our endless sympathy, that it's never someone's fault for the wrong they've done.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that's Christianity. I would say that's seeped into Christianity
agree.
from an empathy culture.
Yeah. It's a
But that's that
distortion.
hunger. It's that hunger
Yeah.
for
You
justice.
can't go wrong. Here's the thing. You're going to err. I think if something comes up, if you're going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Anybody is. So you have to choose which side you're going to fall on the mistakes. On which side are you going to err?
Yeah.
The world says to err on the side of prudence and don't hang your dirty laundry out because it doesn't help anybody. And there's truth in that.
Right.
In fact, you can stumble people. I mean, it happens. I think the other is the better one, that better to say the gospel can cover this.
Yeah.
It'll be really hard. It could cause a divorce. It could whatever.
Yeah.
But the gospel says this is what's happened. If I was in a church on a leadership team and the pastor was accused of something, I would probably say we're going to look into it, and we're going to I'd advocate. Got to let the church know. Maybe not say the name of who made the accusation. You don't want to shame somebody or do tactics that could be twisted like that, but say this is what's going on. I would even say to people, don't get all sympathetic and mad at whoever you think's doing this. Right. That's not appropriate either. Be in prayer. Do we think this is true? What if we just said nobody knows? It's appropriate to look into it. It's funny, Paul says, I think it's in Ephesians, when he says, some sins follow men to their grave, talking about pastors. Others, they come out before and they have to be dealt with. And it says, the elders that sin, let them be rebuked publicly.
Right.
When have you seen that last? Not kicked out of their job. Right?
That's right, yeah.
But rebuked. So it's either what we have fled to is either we cover it up or it's too big for that, we kick them out.
Yeah.
There are some times to kick them out. I'm not saying that there's not. But I think there's it's the 80-20 thing, right? It's the whole host of middle where we should be able to have churches where we can rebuke a pastor as a church body and he's repenting.
Yeah.
Repentant, in the process of repenting, it will be painful, but we can be a family still.
The hard part about all of it, because the big accusation that comes out of how churches handle this stuff, and sometimes it's a very warranted accusation, is that they're covering it up, that they're just covering for each other, right?
Yeah.
That they're too quick to try to reinstate, that there's probably worse coming out, right? When Matt Chandler's whole weird thing with messaging some other guy's wife, just jokes back and forth. Every comment I saw in there was, oh, something else is going to drop soon, right? It's going to come out. It was way worse. They're just covering it up.
Right.
So you can assume that people will assume the worst.
Yes.
But they'll also, even if you do it exactly right, they'll read into it the wrong thing.
I know.
Some people will.
I know.
But that's where you just have to leave it to God.
Yes. And ask your church, these are opportunities. So Paul in another letter says, it's necessary that, and the word there is heresies, not the word as it developed in the councils in 326 and 381 and 431 as unorthodox, therefore not within the pale of Christianity. But before that, it was simply, the word meant divisive, divisions.
Yeah.
There are heresies that it's necessary, it says, that heresies arise, that divisions arise among you, in order that those that are may be approved, that those that are legitimate or genuine may be approved.
Yeah.
And I think what it means is this, that the heresy, the division, the difficulty creates an opportunity for the church in the hand of God for a whole host of things, to be truthful, to live in the gospel, to love somebody, to forgive them, to think the best when you don't know the details. You have all these things that they become the opportunities to do these things, and we throw those opportunities away because they're hard. They're really messy.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
I think that there is part of what we're facing as a culture is we hate hard relational circumstances.
I completely agree.
We just keep running and running and running.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And it just lets the wolf into the sheep pen every time.
Yep, I completely agree. One of the things I thought, and I'll say it since we've spent so long on the Mike Bickle thing here in the church leadership, the first thing I thought when you started mentioning it was, there's a spirit in our day that I've noticed that is social media. You are guilty without evidence. You are guilty by accusation.
Yeah,
that's right. It. It's the trial takes place online.
That's right.
And there's no presentation of evidence. So do you remember when, what's his name, passed away just recently, Ravi Zacharias? Yeah. And did you see the accusation that came after his death? I held an ambivalent view to that personally. And I said, and I've said publicly, well, it may be that that's true. And it may be that it's not. But it's nothing of ours, because he's not here to defend himself. It is a non-issue now. These people, if something did happen and they wanted it to be known and justice in some sort to be carried out, they needed to say it before he died. because now there's no ability to have a fair, in a sense, a trial. He can't defend himself.
Right.
And that's a distortion of evidence. Now, there may be an exception to where it would be appropriate to figure something out for some other reasons. I'm not saying that there wouldn't be.
And there was an investigation in his issue, but you're right, he couldn't have been part of that investigation.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't there.
And it's what happens. My kids got mad at me once. This artist that they liked was accused of something online. And I tried to be helpful to them, and they got mad at me. This was a couple of years ago. But it's like, remember, he's innocent until proven guilty. And they had written him off already, right?
Yeah.
And
right.
it's like he's guilty as soon as the first accusation flies.
Or the second or the third.
Yeah.
Because even if, like, with Kavanaugh, which that stuff was so dirty,
Yeah.
right? There was so lacking of any significant evidence.
Yeah.
But they didn't just send one, they sent three. Because
Yeah.
they know, when you hear the third accusation, you think, it's probably true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was definitely an organization behind that as far as people trying to
There's a ton
collect.
of things in scriptures that we don't do as churches. When was the last time you ever saw somebody bring a matter before the church because they tried it in person and they tried it with witnesses and it didn't work, and so they brought it before the church? Have you ever seen that?
So here's a question. This is actually interesting. No, I have actually, yeah.
Have you?
But it's
I've
quite
not.
rare.
Yeah.
Would the church even give it a platform, right?
Exactly.
If somebody came and said, three people came and said, look, we've met with this guy, he won't stop.
Yeah.
Would you put him on stage? Would you do it?
I don't know. To be completely honest, I don't know.
It's kind of shocking, right?
I hope I would say yes, but it takes a lot of courage to do that because it is a disruption. It is a freak show.
But what an opportunity to say, look,
I agree.
the gospel really gets
I know.
applied.
I
in a
hope
messy
I would,
life.
especially since I now have a situation in which I asked for something like that and it was refused by leadership. Right?
Oh, you did?
I did.
You wanted to take the
Yeah.
stage in that
Yeah.
regard. Wow.
Yeah. And it's told no, and you don't have the power to do it.
Okay, so this is, I know we're over time, but this stirs in me this question of, we have such what I think is confusing view of the pulpit. I think it comes out of the Reformation, the sacred view of how the pulpit should be handled.
I can already tell we're going to disagree. Go
I
ahead.
know we will. That's why I'm bringing it up. That's what makes this interesting.
Or have different emphases.
But I think that impulse to make the pulpit and what we teach, like, oh, if you're going to teach Christian worldview, it should happen in a Sunday school class. You just teach the Bible from the pulpit. And I think, okay, but why or how?
I wouldn't say it that way, but
But the
I
question
do feel something.
Is that protective impulse around how the pulpit should be handled what keeps back those people from coming up to be able to say, we need to bring this to the
That
church?
may be partly. Yeah, I think that could be
Because
partly
that
true.
becomes a public relations impulse too.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
ooh, that's not what we want people to feel like church
Or
is for when they
in
come
the
here.
Reformed groups where I've been a part of, it becomes an issue of what is supposed to be a part of worship. And the connection to Adab and Abihu, they offer this, they make up a better incense. They make an improvement on the incense that God had.
Probably
They think it's
psychedelics.
going to smell better. and God strikes them dead, right?
Yeah.
Because they
Strange
corrupt
fire.
worship, strange fire. And the Reformed groups talk about that one of the disputes in the Reformation between the Anglicans in the Church of England and the Reformers on the continent was, may we in worship do anything that's not forbidden, so everything else is open, or must we be limited to those things that are commanded? And the Puritans and the continent said, no, we're limited. The Church of England and the moderate said, no, we can do whatever as long as it's not forbidden.
Okay.
And I do think that you're right.
Where do you land on that?
Well, I think we're supposed to do what's commanded. I don't.
So no drums.
No, I wouldn't say it
Or
that
is it
way.
because that's in the Psalms
I
or
would
other
say,
places?
instrumentation.
Okay.
And the lute and the lyre and those things.
Yeah.
I think instrumentation is legitimate.
There is a denomination, I can't think
Yeah,
of it,
Church of
probably
Christ.
several.
Yeah.
Because I think the Mennonites, when we went with
Yeah,
them, was
yeah.
all singing.
Well, so the Mennonites are a good example. Not Mennonites, but the Friends ones, where they have a circle, and they're usually small churches, and they face one another, and they wait for somebody who comes and has a word,
Yeah.
right? And the preaching denominations, our Protestant ones, we kind of don't like that because it seems unorganized and disorderly.
Right.
Nevertheless, Paul envisions church life to be such that someone has a word, someone has a tongue,
2-3
someone
people.
has a, yeah.
Right.
And so he envisions church life to function with a little bit of family chaos. So when I did pastor, when I was a senior pastor in California, we sought to do that, and
How'd it go?
it went fine.
Americans get awkward around that stuff.
It was hard, and it became hard even when we implemented. We had a guy come up to me, and the guy who is associate pastor with me, he had a word from the Lord. He shared it with us. He had it written down. He had gotten it that morning. We looked at it and thought, it was a word for the congregation,
Yeah.
and we thought it was good. So we changed the service.
Right.
We
Okay.
altered it. We created space for it. That also means space comes out from elsewhere, right? And that's the things that are also not liked, especially if you're on television. But and he gave his word, and it was by and large well received. Good.
Yeah.
The next week,
He's got another one.
another one.
You like the feeling of that first one.
We read it, and my friend who's co-pastoring with me had a more of a charismatic background. So I'm a little uncomfortable, but I just decided to go first. I'll just tell you right now, I don't think this is right, I don't think this is, I don't think we're supposed to do this. And he says, I feel the same way. So I was like, whew, right? But it's that confirmation of a spirit.
Which is the role of elders in a
That
church
is
gathering.
So
Very
that's how we
biblical.
created it.
Yeah.
That those things, we wanted to give room for them, but they needed to come through leadership. This is what I like, by the way, about Mike Bickle. When I first started looking at his stuff, he says, I'm not a prophet, and the prophets aren't the pastors.
Right.
Such sanity.
Well-
They don't get to come and just stand up and do this, but I've got to make space for them to do it.
Right.
I really like that. Anyway,
that
we told
reminded
this guy
me
no
of-
and he got mad.
Right. Of course. Yeah. There is an interplay between what God shows you for you versus what he shows
I
you
know,
for everybody
I know,
else.
I know.
But the other one is there's an intimacy and an interaction with the Holy Spirit in a church service that you don't get to just run out ahead of him. You know?
Yes.
And it's so easy to assume things, to make assumptions about how things should be in a church because you feel it, right?
Yeah. Well, so to go back to your original thing, I think you're right. A view from the Reformation of the pulpit has a limiting factor and has crowded out the family function of the church.
Yeah.
I call it that. But I don't think that means the view of the Reformation of the pulpit is wrong. I think it just should not have crowded out these inconvenient aspects.
Right.
When you're at home and you got kids in your house, I'm sorry, but life is just messy. And if you can't roll with the punches with kids, you're in for a miserable home, right?
If you're having family dinner every night, there are going to be routines, but there's
That's
also
exactly
room
right.
for
That's
conversation
exactly-
and flexibility.
Yeah.
And if you're having the same meal every night,
So if you take
it's not
head
a
of the
great-
household too far and stamp that stuff out, well, it doesn't mean that head of the household is wrong as that there's something there. It just meant it overrode other aspects that were supposed to complement it.
And that is the weakness of men in the curse
That's
of
true.
Eden.
That's true.
Is to be overbearing.
That's right.
Right.
That's
to
true.
be too controlling in that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it is of pastors too.
Yeah.
Pastors tend to be, I would say the majority of pastors are controlling individuals.
It's almost required for the job in an unhealthy way.
It is in an unhealthy way.
Yeah.
But
Okay, I'm going to change the subject.
yeah.
I want to talk about pop culture a little bit. I know we're over time, but I have a couple
It's
fun
funny,
things.
you have three things. Sometimes we struggle to have anything, and I
Well,
have two.
I'm not going to do
That
all
aren't
three,
even-
but I have one. I was listening to these guys lament how pathetic Americans are in the face of so many obvious attacks on our way of life, right? Why don't Americans get involved, even in just their local school board or their political process? And then they were talking about we had all these hero movies, and yet nobody lives it out. And I started to think, well, what was it about the hero movies that's different from Braveheart, right? Or Gladiator, or those other movies that were so moving to us? Even Forrest Gump, right? This kind of regular dopey guy who lives an extraordinary life. And it dawned on me, and it made me think maybe this is what the whole Greek mythology thing is about too, is we were watching heroes with powers we can never have change things and fight evil. And so now we've become spectators rather than actual people getting engaged.
Even Batman has the wealth. He
He's
doesn't
so
have
rich,
powers,
you can't imagine.
But it's the tech. and
Right.
the-
Yeah. But that whole superhero genre to me signals to young men that's not you. It'll never be you, right? You can't change things. You can't fix things. I don't know.
I think that's a great point. I mean, I don't think you would probably make it to an exclusion to the element of hero. A portrayal of a hero is a good thing,
Of course.
right?
Yeah, right.
So let's just say the classic Superman. Well, Justice, the American movie, whatever you want to say, the time when there was virtue that surrounded him,
Yeah.
that's inspiring. Captain America was inspiring to kids in a certain age and era. Now they knew that they didn't have those powers, but there's inspiration even if there is distortion,
Yeah.
or we've become an audience, like you
But
said.
the way I think of it is it doesn't inspire you like Braveheart would, where it's just a guy.
Yeah.
And his girl's been murdered and he's going to make a difference. It's sort of that revenge story a little bit, right?
Yeah.
He's gonna fight now. And when this guy fights, watch out.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a little bit more of that we need in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting.
All right, you wanted to make a recommendation.
Oh, good. I was hoping you were going to let me do that. Okay, Planet Narnia. Have you heard of it?
No.
Planet Narnia by Michael Ward. A book on Lewis's 7 volumes, Narnia series.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the Rosetta Stone. It came out maybe 2021, something like that.
So he's trying to put it all together in one picture. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, his claim is that he has unlocked the Narnia series.
Wait, there are secrets hidden?
Yep.
Deliberate.
And
C.S. Lewis.
I think he's right. Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And Lewis did it on purpose. Now, not in a Harry Potter kind of way, not in an Easter egg kind of way.
Uh-huh.
But here's what it is. The book is exceptional, and it traces, this is what the book's about.
Yeah.
Most books are about one thing. Planet Narnia. That, what you have to understand about Lewis is he is not a modern. He is a medievalist. Mm-hmm. He, the Romantic Image is a book he wrote, the Discarded Image I meant, and then he has something on medieval love, and they're his scholarly works, and they're exceptional. They are so good. The Discarded Image is basically the image of the world in the medieval perspective when Christendom was at its height.
Yeah.
And anyway, so Lewis believed as part of that image, the discarded image of the medieval world, that the planets, of which the moon was one of them, right?
The heavenly bodies.
The heavenly bodies. There are 7 major ones from the old world perspective, that they are angelic. Aristotle he called it a prime mover. An angelic being made the planets move, and it had to do with Aristotelian stuff.
Okay.
But the church in the Middle Ages took that idea and said, well, these are angels. So the church, a lot of modern...
and the Bible does have a lot of connection between moving stars and angels and falling stars.
Of the morning, the stars rejoiced at the foundations of the world. The morning,
Yeah.
So there's something there biblically, right?
And Satan is called the morning star.
That's right. That's right. What he took was, and then what developed in the Middle Ages is the idea that these celestial bodies. So if you think that Mars, for example, whether it's in the limited Aristotelian sense that it's a prime mover, or if it's in the church sense that it's an angelic being, Mars, being the god of war, has, and they called it celestial influences, right?
Okay.
That the influences of Mars could be felt. And Venus, the goddess of love, that the influences, the angelic influences of these virtues, that there's Saturn virtues and Jupiter virtues and Mars and Venus. And
it starts to sound like astrology a little bit.
Okay, so astrology would be the further distortion of that out into predictive elements.
Okay.
And where the Middle Ages were is more of influence elements rather than predictive.
Okay.
So they would have believed that the spheres exercise an influence. If you're born under Mars, it has an effect upon you, versus if your friend is born under Venus.
Okay. All right.
So here's
how does it connect to Lewis?
That's the next step. The 7 Narnia books are one apiece for each of those heavenly bodies.
Oh.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe starts off with Jupiter. So so in each chapter,
he goes
lays
through
the
and
proof out
connects
of
it. Wow.
So it's quite complex. But for example, in the Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, by Jove is like 13 times, and I think it's 1 time in all the rest. But Jove is Jupiter.
Okay.
Okay, and those things, they're saying, there's words. All the planets had metals that were connected to them in the Middle Ages. So I think tin is a Jupiter metal, and so you find tin in the Jupiter
Referred
line.
to throughout the book. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
So he references all what would be Middle Ages connections as a part of the story development.
Yeah.
And the main one was the essence of the angelic being in its good influence. So Lewis thought that the day he lived in, which was post-World War I and into World War II, he called it, we live under the reign of Saturn, which is death.
Wow. Yeah.
And he didn't want to start, so he started with Jupiter. The key of Jupiter is joy. And he believed that his era needed joy more than anything. That's why he started with Jupiter and the line in which we were. But he goes through all 7.
Yeah.
And so each of the books are a reflection of one of these bodies, heavenly bodies, with its spiritual dynamics behind it and its effect upon the earth. And he's trying to write in such a way to create that effect as a novel, as a story.
Just by reading it, you are impacted in the same way. That's
right.
wild. I got to see that.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's great.
All right.
That's
my
awesome. That's a great way to
recommendation.
finish. All right. You've been listening to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke. If you enjoyed this episode or found something to reconsider, share it with a friend. Start a good conversation and remember to dig a little
I should
deeper.
say, as we dig a little deeper, today is the anniversary of Lewis's, his birth.
Okay. All right. Don't forget to think again. We'll see you next time.